Hi and welcome to my first video. Today what I'm going to show you is how to blink multiple LEDs, and then I'm also going to show you how to add a button to the circuit so that you can switch through the different sequences without actually having to change the code and then upload it onto the Arduino each time you want to change the sequence. So this is the basic circuit I'll be working off. On this side here you have your negative power rail. To this we will connect each of the 330 ohm resistors, which will then go onto the negative end of the LED, and then each positive end of the LED will go onto pin 2 through to pin 9 on the Arduino board. So what basically happens is when we set each of these pins too high on in the software, each of these LEDs will light up. Okay, so now we'll have a look at the sketch. Now, since this is my first video, I'll also quickly go over general information about a sketch in Arduino. So a sketch is basically the program. Now, generally a sketch would have a setup function, which is like a place where everything is initialized. So everything is basically set to like a state where you want to start off from, and then after that you generally have a loop function which keeps going on and on. So all the things you actually want to do will be within this function, so you can have all the other different functions called from here, and then after that you can actually have the definitions of each of the functions. So over here for this one, what they've basically done is made an array of all the different pins that are connected to the LEDs, and then after that we have the setup function where they've initialized each of those pins to be an output so that we can set it to high or low. After that we have the loop function where we've called the function that actually will blink the LEDs in a sequence, and then below that we've got the actual definition of that function. So if we have a closer look, what we can see is we've used the digital write function to make each of the pins high, and in between that we've put in a bit of a delay, which is 100 milliseconds. So there's a while between each of the LEDs turning on. So we've done that for each of the 8 LEDs, and then after that we have the same sort of thing, but this time we've made each of the pins low, which means we've turned the LEDs off. So this basically gives the effect of turning on all the LEDs one by one and then turning them off. Now because this keeps happening over and over again quickly, we get the effect of the LEDs blinking in a sequence. Now I've wired the whole circuit up, and this is what it should look like. We've got our Arduino board on this side, and we've got the breadboard on this side. Now we have a positive and negative wire coming in from the ground and the 5 volts on the Arduino board. That goes into the positive and negative rail on the breadboard. For this circuit we will actually not be using the positive rail because each positive of the LED is actually connected to the pins on the Arduino board directly. So on this side we have the negative rail, we have each of the 330 ohm resistors that goes onto the negative rail and then onto the negative end of each of the LEDs, and then on this side each positive end of the LED goes onto pin 2 all the way up to pin 9 on the Arduino board. So I've already uploaded the code that came with the kit and has the sequences on it. So I've already uploaded that onto the board, and I'm just going to power it up now to show you that to show you how it works. So as you can see, I've just powered it up and the LEDs are blinking in a sequence. So how this is actually done is we basically set all the pins from 2 all the way up to 9 as outputs, and then each time we want to light up an LED, we set that particular pin to high, and then when we want to turn it off, we set it to low. So that's how we basically achieve the effect of blinking the LEDs in a sequence. Okay, now I'll show you how we can add a button to the circuit so that we can switch between the different sequences without actually having to change the code each time we want to. Okay, so for that, what we need to do first of all is have a pin for the button. So I've chosen pin 11, but you can essentially choose any of the remaining pins from 9 onwards, so that's 10, 11, 12 or 13. So I've called it button pin, and I've said it's going to be pin 11, and then I have a value here, a variable called val, which is going to be used to read the value of the pin when the button is pressed. And then I have another variable here called sequence. So what I'm basically thinking of doing is each of the sequences will be assigned a number. So say for example the first sequence will be number 1, the second sequence will be number 2, and the third one will be number 3. So this variable here is going to keep track of which sequence we are currently playing. And then here in the setup function, I have designated the button pin to be an input. So the board, the Arduino, is going to look for any input on pin 11. And then in the loop function, what I've done is I've used the digital read function to read the value of the button pin and assign that value to the variable that we made earlier. And then I've put a bit of conditional statements here. So what I've said is if the value is low, which means that the button is pressed, it does the next thing here, which is we also need to check if we've reached sequence number 3, which is the last sequence, and if we have, then we need to move it back to sequence 1. So basically, if the button is pressed, check if this is sequence 3. If it is, then just take it back to sequence 1. Otherwise, increase the sequence by an increment of 1. So that's what this sequence plus does. It increases the sequence by 1. And then down the bottom here, I've got a switch statement, which is used to select which sequence to play. So I've put the variable here, the sequence variable here. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the sequence variable, and if it's 1, then it's going to go through this sequence, which is one after the other. If it's sequence 2, then it's going to blink the LEDs one at a time, and if it's sequence 3, it's going to blink them in and out, so starting from the middle going outwards. So that's basically it in terms of including the button. Obviously all the different sequences have been programmed here, so we have the one after the other, we have the one at a time, and we have the in and out. Okay, so let's upload this and I will show you what happens. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to add the button to the circuit to change or to switch through the different sequences. Now this is the circuit diagram of what we need to do. So on this side we have the negative rail or the ground, that's the button, and that's our pin 11 on the Arduino board. Now if you look at this diagram, you might think that this should work, but with the Arduino it doesn't just sense if, well, it generally senses if a pin is high or low, but what's going to happen with this sort of circuit is that in this state where the button is not pressed, the voltage on this pin 11 is going to fluctuate and vary. So the Arduino will not get a constant high or or low value on pin 11 in this situation. So what we need to do is we need to get a 10 kilo ohm resistor, and we need to attach that to this junction here, so going to pin 11 as well, and then we need to connect the other side of the resistor, so that's 10k, and the other side needs to go to the positive rail, so positive. So what this will do is it will just ensure that in the situation where the button is not pressed, we will always have a constant 5 volts going to pin 11 on the Arduino, so it's going to be a constantly high state. And then as soon as we press the button, it's going to complete this circuit, and obviously the voltage is going to choose to go through to the ground rather than to this side, so we'll have a low. So this will give a more reliable high or low reading on pin 11. Okay, so I've actually wired everything up here. So I've got my button here, and then I've got the resistor, the 10 kilo ohm resistor on this side going to the positive, and also going to the connection on the button that's going to pin 2 on the Arduino board. And then I have the other side of the button connected to the negative rail. So if I now power this up, you can see that it starts off with this sequence, and then when I press the button, it actually changes to this sequence where it's lighting up each LED one at a time. And then if I press it again, it goes to the next sequence where it blinks the LEDs in and out, so basically from the middle outwards. Now when you actually build this, you'll notice that the button is not very responsive, and you need to sometimes press it for a while before it actually registers and changes the sequence. Now initially I couldn't understand why this was the case, but then I figured out that it's because of all the different delays in the loop, because they tend to sort of add up, like between each of the each of the LEDs blinking, so that makes the button less responsive. So generally with most of your programs where you have a delay in between, pressing the buttons is going to be a bit less responsive than it would if it was just a program where there was no delays.